Welcome, Hop Nation podcast viewers. Really excited to have a great guest, Gary Latham from University of Toronto. Gary is the Secretary of State Professor of Organizational Effectiveness. He's a former president of the Canadian Psychological Association, the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology, and president of Work and Organizational Psychology, a division of the International Association of Applied Psychology. He's a fellow of the American Psychological Association, Association for Psychological Science, Academy of Management, CPA, National Academy of Human Resources, SIOP, and the Royal Society of Canada. He's the only recipient of both awards, Distinguished Contributions to Science and to Practice from the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. And with all of that, he still takes time for a burger and a beer with a PhD student like me. So welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Corey. I just wish my 96-year-old mother were here to listen to that nice introduction.
Yes. Now, I understand you're in Florida right now on sabbatical. Is that still the case?
Yeah, I'm considered to be a very smart Canadian. I have a home in Toronto and a home here in Florida, and I'm here from approximately December through May before I go back north.
Excellent. Well, that's a good time to be out of Toronto and down in Florida.
I agree.
So, Gary, one thing I like to do with all our guests is ask them a bit of kind of your founder's story and how you got into the profession and doing what you're doing. Like, what was your background and how did you get into academia and the research and all this work you're currently doing?
Well, that is a bit of a long story. As an undergraduate student, I went to Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Hey.
And they had and continue to have an excellent psychology department. There were laboratories where we had to do research in each one of our psychology courses. And they were largely replication studies of well-known experiments. And I just got bitten by the bug. I just loved doing research. And when it worked out well, I would go, I'll be darned, look at that. And if it didn't work out well, I'd go, I'll be darned, I wonder what went wrong. And next thing you know, I was applying to graduate school at Georgia Tech. Then I went to the University of Akron in Ohio. And I've had a very long and pleasant career.
That's excellent. Now, I've come to know you through your contributions to goal-setting theory and how that contributes to success, performance, and motivation. Can you tell me how you got involved in this work that you and Ed Locke are really known for goal-setting theory?
Well, there were three interrelated events. First, I was doing a factor analysis back in the 60s. Everybody did factor analysis of everything. And I was working with my major professor, Bill Ronan, and we just serendipitously included an item having to do with goal setting on a questionnaire that were being administered in the forest products industry. Georgia's huge in terms of logging. And we found that this goal-setting item loaded on the same factor as high productivity in terms of number of trees cut down per hour. Then I also did a critical incident technique master's thesis and found that one of the behaviors that differentiated effective woods workers from not so effective woods workers was goal setting. So that was a second critical incident. And then the third interrelated item, I was reading psychological abstracts and I kept coming across these laboratory experiments by some kid I had never heard of by the name of Ed Locke. And he was showing that in a laboratory experiment, if you gave people a specific high goal in terms of number of addition problems to solve or tinker toys to make or words out of scrambled letters, those with specific high goals did better than those who were urged to do their best. So I raced into Dr. Ronan's office and said, look, there may be some sort of theoretical basis for what we're finding. That was kind of the end of that. So there's a fourth interrelated event. I then went to the University of Akron, where I was studying with Gary Uckel, who's famous for his work in leadership. And I showed him my technical reports I'd written on goal setting. And he immediately urged me to send the technical reports to Ed Locke. Ed Locke responded within the week. And he and I have been doing collaborative research since 1974. We published our first article in 1975 together, and we're still going strong with articles that came out in 2019. So it's been a good marriage between Locke and me.
Absolutely. He's like your man bride almost. There's not too many relationships nowadays that can last decades like that. And to have that level of collaboration in academia and practice is remarkable.
Well, since you put it that way, I outlasted one of his wives and he outlasted one of mine. So I guess we've got a pretty good relationship.
Obviously, that's awesome. So for those listeners that may not be familiar with academia, who are coming from practice and, they might be knowledgeable on goal setting, what specifically is goal setting theory and the foundation in its simplest form?
Well, before I answer that, I just want to state for your listeners that goal setting has been rated in the academic community as number one in terms of theoretical contribution and number one in terms of practical contribution. And here's what the theory says. Rather than setting an abstract goal such as urging people to do their best, that's kind of the mantra for Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, you should be setting a specific high goal. And specific high goals lead to higher performance than no goal setting or abstract goal setting. Then second, given ability and goal commitment, high goals lead to higher performance than easier goals. And then third, which almost sounds counter to common sense, participation in decision making, giving people praise, pats on the back, providing monetary incentives has no effect on behavior unless those kinds of things lead to the setting of and commitment to a specific high goal. And I suspect most of your listeners are familiar with the acronym SMART, which has a solid scientific basis. SMART, S is specific, M is measurable, A is attainable, R relevant, and T, you must have a time frame. Now, the next part that I would probably want to emphasize, because I do want to emphasize, is that when you're setting these specific high goals, you have to take into account 3-4 factors. Do you have ability? So for example, this is the beginning of 2020. I would truly love to be a billionaire by the December 31st of 2020. But it's silly for me to set that specific goal because I lack financial acumen to do it. It's just not realistic. So the goal, you have to take into account ability. You have to take into account commitment, how committed you are. So lots of us set goals for, I'm going to lose weight. I'm going to lose 10 pounds by March. But we're not truly committed. And when we get access to a soda pop or a bottle of beer, very few of us say no, and we take a swig, and that's the end of that New Year's resolution. In addition, the goal has to be relevant to the person, has to be important to the person, and for most of us, dieting isn't. And there has to be a time frame. So I can say I'm going to lose 10 pounds. By when? Oh, I don't know. I just will. That doesn't lead to any change in behavior. But if you set a T for time frame and say, this is January, by March 31st, I'm going to lose 30 pounds is not realistic. So I'm going to lose 30 pounds by June 1. Now there's a time frame. And given commitment, I'm probably going to attain it.
I love it. Well, there's so many nuggets in what you were just saying, you know, the familiarity with SMART, the fact that goal setting theory has been rated #1, both in academia as well as in practice. That's, to me, what's had me so attracted to the theory that I base not only my PhD work, but, you know, my business around this, and it shaped the corporate training. One thing I wanted to ask is, how does feedback and coaching relate into goal setting theory?
Oh, so I left that out. And I was saying you have to have ability and you have to have commitment. You also have to have feedback that shows to what extent you're on track, off track. So feedback is critical for informational purposes. Do I need to make a change in my plan for attaining that goal? And then feedback is also motivational. If you set sub-goals, and I recommend doing that on a complex task, if you set sub-goals, as you start to attain one sub-goal, that motivates you to continue to pursue the next sub-goal, which motivates you to continue to set the next sub-goal. So feedback goes hand in hand with goal setting.
I love it.
Feedback without goal setting, by the way, has little or no effect on behavior. Goal setting without feedback handicaps itself. So you want to think of goal setting and feedback as hand in hand.
Excellent. Now, I know in the high performance cycle of goal setting theory, you have things called mediators and moderators. And for those that aren't, you know, in academia, what's the difference between a mediator and moderator, and how that impacts the underlying theory?
All right, now those are just scientific terms that I'd tell your listeners to forget about. The moderators, all that means is boundary conditions or on condition that. So when I say a specific high goal leads to higher performance than an easier goal, on condition that you have feedback, on condition that you have the ability to attain it, on condition that you're committed. Oh, and another one I failed to mention earlier, and on condition that you have the resources to attain the goal. So that's what's called moderators or boundary conditions, or in plain English, conditional. On condition that specific high goals lead to high performance. Now, mediators, that's just scientific jargon for saying what explains all this. So how do you explain the positive effects of setting a specific high goal? Well, if you're a scientist, you'll say, let's discover mediators. If you're a practitioner, you'll say, explain it in plain English. And in plain English, here's the explanation. Specific high goals affect choices. So rather than set no goals and meander, or rather than set vague goals and go off in this direction and that direction, specific high goals give you focus. So there's one explanation. They focus your attention. So if you're studying for exams and your friends say, let's go out for a beer, as tempted as you may be, if you're focusing on passing that exam, you're going to say, no, catch me later in the week after I take the exam. Another explanation, in addition to focus, the second explanation is specific high goals increase your effort. And the more effort you put into something, the more likely you are to be successful. Then the third explanation is persistence. If you set a specific high goal and you're committed to it, then you will persist until you attain that goal. So we have choice, we have effort, and we have persistence. And the last one is developing a strategy or plan for attaining that goal. Once you set the goal, now you sit back and say, all right, how am I going to go about attaining it? If I'm going to a party on Saturday and there's going to be lots of alcohol and lots of great food, how am I going to say no when people offer me a second helping? Or how do I say no even to a first helping? I'm going to need a plan so I just don't come across as rude and go, no, I don't want that. So there's 4 explanations. There's choice, effort, persistence, and strategy or plan.
That's excellent. Now, I know in reviewing some of your research too, I love the idea of focus, but there's also courage and confidence and the work around efficacy and Bandura's work on self-efficacy. How does self-efficacy, well, first, what is self-efficacy for those listeners who may not know, and how does that play into goal-setting theory?
Okay, self-efficacy is a 25-cent word for a very straightforward concept called task confidence. So it doesn't mean overall confidence, but with regard to a specific task or domain. In my case, the domain would be psychology. And self-efficacy means self, we're talking about me, I. So it's my confidence, my belief, my conviction that I can cause, I can bring about, I can make happen. Now, if you ask me, let's go play golf, my self-efficacy is rather low. But if you ask me questions with regard to any area of organizational psychology, let alone goal-setting theory, my self-efficacy couldn't be higher. So think of it as task-specific confidence and the words, yes, I can do this. I may not be able to do it right now, but give me a little while and I'll figure it out and I can do this. So relationship to goal setting. It's a very important question. People with high self-efficacy, they set high goals and they remain committed to them. And more importantly, when they encounter obstacles or setbacks, that's the fun, that's the excitement for these people, because the fun isn't figuring out how am I going to overcome this obstacle so that I can attain this goal. But, and it's a big but, people with low self-efficacy, low task-specific performance, they encounter an obstacle and they are quick to quit the goal. I can't do this. I told you I can't do this. And they are quick to give up. So you can think of high self-efficacy as critical for resiliency.
Well, that's excellent you're talking about this, because the whole HOP model and this burning question I've had since the age of about 10 is, how can average people from average backgrounds or circumstance become world-class or elite level performers? And I've broken it down to 2 simple things. I think people give up too quickly or too easily. And this idea of resilience, when I see now this movement towards no competition, no grades and stuff like that, I think it's breeding a bit of entitlement mentality, and we aren't preparing children and people for the real world, where unfortunately there is competition, there is ranking and performance measurement, and they're going to lack resilience. And Angela Duckworth has called it grit, and I know you have opinion and perspective on the difference between grit and resilience. Can you comment on this concept of grit and resilience and what I was just talking about?
Well, I don't want to sound negative. I've known Angela Duckworth since she was a doctoral student. And science deplores coming up with multiple names for the same concept. And from my standpoint, grit is the same thing as self-efficacy. If they're different, I've never read or seen anything or read about any empirical experiments that were able to differentiate between the two. So if people in the real world want to use the word grit, I'm all for it. But in the scientific world, I'd like to see them stick with the word self-efficacy, as that's the original word. Now,
Yeah,
not
and
getting
resilience
grades.
would be the other side of it too. I think that
Well, resilience
bounce
is the
back
outcome.
factor too.
Grit is the outcome of self-efficacy. No, what I want to say is resiliency is the outcome of grit and self-efficacy. And people who don't receive grades, or everybody's told they're good, almost all of us, it's just human nature, will seek feedback to say, okay, well, I know I was good, but how good was I, or how could I get better? And what the educational system is doing in many cases is working hard to attain mediocrity.
I agree.
The kids in China or the kids in Japan will surpass the kids in Canada and the United States in no time if many North American educators have their way.
Well, I love this. And I mean, we could do an entire podcast just on this topic, but I want to keep things going with this topic of goal setting theory. And I know you've done some work with Gerard and some others in Ontario on higher order goals, and with, recent advancements in, neurobiology and the link with psychology. What can you tell me in terms of research around higher order goals and what those are and how that plays into goal setting theory?
Well, in many cases, higher order goals, again in plain English, can come down to vision statements. So I'll come off the top of my head. How about Disney, since I'm in Florida? The overall higher order goal for customers or clients is learning through entertainment. Now that's motivating overall, but now you need to get concrete and set specific goals as to what you're going to do as a Disney employee to make learning within the Disney parks fun. Probably the best example is, I just went blank on it. There's Disney World, and what's right beside Disney World?
Universal Studios?
No. Within the Disney, within the confines of Disney.
Oh.
It's, what is it?
Disneyland?
You go around, you see all the countries of the world.
Oh, I'm not sure, Gary. I need to take more holidays.
Yeah, it'll come to me. It's, my dementia must be setting in. But at any rate, you need to, let me give you examples of different types of goals. You've got performance goals, which are outcome goals. So if you're a golfer, a performance goal might be, I want to get somewhere between 88 and 90 when I play today. That's an outcome goal. And those goals should only be set if you already have high ability. If you don't have high ability, and this is the work I've been doing with Gerard Seitz at the University of Western Ontario, you should be setting learning goals. And with learning goals, you're looking at discovering processes, procedures, coming up with plans for mastering a task. So I'll stay with golf since most people can relate to that. And I say, I'm a lousy golfer. Well, in that case, if you set performance goals, all they're going to do is increase your anxiety, and your performance on the golf course is going to get worse. But you can set learning goals such as, I'm going to come up with 5 ways I can improve my score with my putter. Or I'm just going to work on hitting the ball with my 7-iron. You're focusing on process, you're focusing on procedure. Now, a third one has to do with behavioral goals. Not all goals can be referred to in terms of a bottom line. So you say, I want to become a team player this year. I'm going to be a much better team player in 2020 than I was in 2019. So now it's like playing dictionary. In science, we call it a job analysis. But in everyday life, it's playing a dictionary and saying, let's define behaviorally, what do we mean by team playing? So in a classroom setting, it might be sharing my notes with other people in my study group. And then you can ask people to assess you from 1 to 5. 1 is low, 5 is high. How do you see me in terms of a team player? And you may have 5, 6 different behaviors that define what you're getting into, such as team playing ethics. Say, I'm going to be more ethical in 2020. Well, behaviorally, how do you define ethics? And then asking your peers, your colleagues, to assess you on how are you perceived by others in terms of being ethical, in terms of being a team player. So those are 3 different types of behaviors. The one you want to avoid, like the plague I referred to earlier, that has to do with an attitudinal goal, and the attitudinal goal is referred to as, I swear to you, I'm going to do my best to become better at X, Y, or Z. And that type of goal has no effect on behavior whatsoever.
And this is where transferring that attitudinal goal to like a learning goal will make it more effective. And I know that this research that you and Gerard Seitz did, you actually referenced Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck and her work on mindsets as contributory to this idea around learning orientation and learning goals.
Yeah, she works largely with children in elementary school, and we were working with employees, and she often refers to her work as a trait. Some people are just born with a predisposition to have a learning goal fixation and see errors as just part of the normal learning process. And we look at learning goals as a state, meaning that anybody can set them and make them specific and then pursue and attain them.
I love that because it brings back in your concept of choice in the goal setting theory as well, and how there's different types of goals. There's the performance and outcome based goals, but also this other end process. And you talked about breaking down the goals into more bite-sized chunks. And I know in the work that we do in corporate training, we break that down into action plans and shortened time frames and the baby steps. And James Clear in Atomic Habits, his book, he talks about, if the goal is to lose 10 pounds, a sub goal might be buy a gym membership, get to the gym. And he says he has something like a 2-minute drill, put out your gym clothes and shoes the night before, or it might be.
And what you're doing, in your example, what you've done well is combined a performance goal, which is I'm going to lose X pounds, and sub goals, which are I would like to lose Y pounds. Let's say I want to lose X pounds in 3 months. All right, so now sub goals. What's your goal for week 1? What's your goal for week 2? What's your goal for week 3? And then you've combined behavioral goals, which is I'm going to join an exercise club. I'm going to hire a coach. I'm going to work at least X hours a day on losing exercise. So you've got the outcome goals, you've got the behavioral goals, and you've got the sub goals.
Absolutely. I love it. Now, I've heard higher order goals referred to as those things and processes and that in the subconscious or unconscious level. Is there any truth to that, or can you comment on that?
Well, I've never seen or heard of sub goals as higher order goals. but I have done a lot of work on how you can prime, which means implant, a goal in someone's subconscious in the absence of their awareness, and then watch how it influences positively their behavior. And that's a whole new realm of research that my colleagues and I have been working on for the past 10 years, and it's fascinating.
Well, and I love it because we've all seen those iceberg models, and the behaviors and the manifestation of a lot of goals and that, and success is that 20% that we actually see. But a lot of the things that drive that performance and success is actually below the surface and, in our unconscious or subconscious, whatever your preference term is. And literally the higher order, I came up with the name of my company is HOP, which stands for higher order performance. So obviously this higher order stuff is pretty important to me. And I love that you've been doing 10 years of research around this, and it's motivated me to be on the career path and that, and why we're talking today. So I thank you first and foremost, and love this work that's being done.
Oh, thank you. Well, I can give you a couple of examples for your listeners.
I would love to hear that.
Just using just using achievement-related words increases employee performance. So we had a CEO who regularly sends out a weekly email every Monday to his employees, and we randomly assigned who was going to receive one email versus another. We did this obviously with the CEO's permission, and the employees who received the same email as everybody else, but had achievement-related words such as strive, pursue, excel, at the end of the week, as measured by the organization's computer, way outperformed those who had a speech, an email message with no achievement-related words. We had recruiters, not recruiters, but people who solicit donations to charitable causes. We showed them a picture of a racer crossing the finish line. And in the other case, employees saw no picture. Those employees who saw the picture raised way more money than the people who saw no picture. And then when you ask employees afterwards, did you notice the achievement-related words? Did you notice the photograph? They have no idea whatsoever. And then a big laugh as to how it affected their behavior when they weren't aware of it doing so. We also know that people often perform much better on sunny days than they do on rainy days. So there's all sorts of cues in our environment that affect our behavior in the absence of our awareness in a positive way.
That's amazing stuff. And I know, the whole realm of values and beliefs come into that as well. So I love it.
So you just prompted me to add for your listeners. We can't prime you to do things that you don't value, that's not important to you. So for example, we can't prime you to do something evil. We can't use words or pictures to get you to do something that's not in your value system. So when we use these environmental cues, they're prompting words and behaviors that are stored in your subconscious that you feel are important, and it activates you to do them.
I love it. I love it. Now, you and Ed Locke in 2002 wrote a paper on the 35-year odyssey of goal-setting theory. And in that paper, you had the high-performance cycle of goal-setting theory. I'm wondering if any updates have been made to that high performance cycle of goal setting theory since that time, and your thoughts on that.
Well, there's been some research by a research duo Selden and Brewer in the United States, and a person by Laura Borgoni, who's a professor at the University of Rome. And nothing's been added. It's just that it's been shown quantitatively to be as applicable now as it was when he first came out with it. Actually, the first model of it came out in the late 1990s. So it has endured well.
That's fascinating. I'll have to connect with you after this podcast and get, that literature, because what I'm doing in my research that I was sharing that Terry Wagar and Heidi Vigan and I have done is an update and additions to the high performance cycle of goal setting. So this might be something that, as we share, maybe there's some co-authorship here down the road once I finish off these comps and can get back to doing the research stuff.
Sounds great.
Awesome. Now, is there anything else around goal setting theory or current research outside of goal setting theory that you'd like to share with us in terms of organizational effectiveness? And
I think the only that we've covered Bandora's self-efficacy, and we've covered my theory with Ed Locke on goal setting pretty thoroughly. I think the third big one for practitioners is organizational justice theory.
Oh, what's that?
That theory in one sentence says, in addition to being fair with your employees, you must be seen as fair. And the reason why this theory is so important is because nothing kills a team faster than perceptions of lack of trust. And the theory specifies ways that you can gain that trust.
Yes.
And the big name in that theory is Rob Folger, Folger.
Okay. Interesting. I will have to take a deeper dive into that.
If you've got these three pretty well at your fingertips, I think you'll succeed quickly in business.
That's excellent, Gary. And I love how you've been able to bridge this gap that we hear too often about, the gap between research and academia and practice. And you've obviously been recognized in both fields. And even just in this podcast, you're bridging both. What work do you think still needs to be done? And what can we do as practitioners and researchers to further the cause and decrease this gap so we can collaborate and have more meaningful contribution of research to inform practice and practice to inform research?
Well, probably unfair to say this, but if there are bad guys, the bad guys are the deans of business schools. And it's because the deans of business schools only reward faculty who publish in academic journals and use exclusively academic jargon. And what we need to realize is that higher education is supported by the taxpayer, and deans need to be rewarding faculty who can speak as scientists, but also can speak in plain English to make sure that their findings are being used and understood by the public. Can you imagine in the field of medicine if we discovered the cure for polio way back in the 50s and the cure for tuberculosis, and all that knowledge is sitting on a shelf in a New England Journal of Medicine in a library, and the public has yet to figure out that this stuff exists. So there's just vast, voluminous amounts of information from the behavioral sciences that would benefit the public that faculty aren't motivated to make known. Now, I'll give you a general plug. I'm the editor of Organizational Dynamics, which is a prestigious journal. It's reviewed. Articles are reviewed before they're published. And the audience is solely managers and MBA students. But not all faculty are rewarded for publishing in that journal. So my attitude or my suggestion is bring pressure to bear on business school deans.
Agreed. And I would add research funding, which is also at the institutional and dean level weighted very high, is heavily weighted towards research dollars and less on the practice implications and contributions to theory versus practice.
Well, you know, in Canada, we're a bilingual nation. We're supposed to be able to speak and understand French and English. And I would say in the world of academia, we need to become bilingual as defined by being able to speak with academic peers in very precise language and also be able to speak in everyday language so that what we know becomes beneficial for society.
Agreed. And that's why I love talking with people like yourself and my PhD supervisor, Kerry Wagar, who literally wrote the textbook, the best-selling textbook in Canada on strategic HR, and Heidi Vigan, who comes from the corporate world. You know, we'll keep fighting that good fight, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Now, I want to shift to a new direction. There's this huge movement, I know, in performance theory, and that where we're seeing all these sports psychologists, whether it's in corporate. I know the NFL has an average of 7 sports psychologists per team now, and in doing work with people who work in the professional sports field, we're seeing more and more of this. What are you hearing, and what are some of the things you're seeing as this relates to goal setting theory and this movement around sports psychology and the mental mindset side of things as it relates to performance?
Well, in the old days, we used to conduct annual performance appraisals.
Yes.
And we're still required to do them for legal reasons in the 10 provinces and the 50 states and in many Western countries in Europe. However, this once-a-year performance appraisal has no enduring positive effect on behavior. So we've now borrowed from the concept of sports psychology. You don't need sports psychologists in industry, but we borrowed from sports psychology, which in essence says people need to set goals and then they need to have feedback ongoing basis, not once a year, not once a quarter, not once a week, but every day as you see people performing their job, let them know when you see them doing something well, and let them know when you see something that they can correct. So, for example, back to golf. Nice thing about taking a pro, the golf pro, the club pro out with you to play golf is that she or he can immediately give you feedback if you have a very nice stroke, nice shift in your weight, don't hit the club too quickly, don't swing it too quickly, and when you top the ball or do something wrong, can't figure out why, person is right there, the pro's right there to give you feedback. And in addition, what a good coach should do, whether it's on the football field or in General Motors or Apple or Google or what have you, is to be continually finding way to build your confidence. And that's the essence of sports psychology and industry. Goal setting, feedback, build confidence, keep people thinking, I can master this, I can do this. So I think it's a very good move in industry.
Absolutely. And something else I'm seeing a lot in terms of the psychological field and research is that work that Sean Acor at Harvard and Emma Seppala at Yale and Stanford have done around happiness, and how a lot of times in the past we would think that, okay, set a goal, and once I've achieved something, the reward is I'll be happy, and you get a reward on the other end. And their research has shown that happiness and being happy is actually a precursor to performance and success. Have you, are you familiar with that work, and have you looked at how that integrates into goal setting theory and the other work you've done?
Okay. All right, this issue of happiness preceding performance has been a controversy since the 1930s and the famous Hawthorne studies and the human relations movement, etc. By the 1950s, 1960s, I thought the controversy had been put to bed. You can be happy at work for a whole lot of reasons that have nothing to do with your job performance. You can love your peers, you can love your office, you can love your benefits, you can love the location, the geography, you can love your boss, and still be a malingerer on the job. What we showed in the 1960s is that we had it backwards. It isn't that happiness leads to performance. It's that people who perform well on their job in general become highly satisfied with what they're doing. Think about it, any aspect of life. What you do well, you generally like. I'm not going to say it's always true, but mostly true. So I'm not a fan of focusing on happiness for happiness' sake. I'm a fan of making sure that people have the knowledge, the skills, the resources they need to do their job well, receive feedback on how well they're doing, and then watch happiness as an outcome along with high performance.
Excellent. Well, that's an interesting perspective, and I really appreciate that contrast to, what some of those other psychologists have put out. And I know about the Hawthorne studies and that whole movement. I didn't realize the history around the happiness research as it relates to performance. So thank you for that.
Do you want to decide? You can cut it out if you don't think it's relevant.
No, I love it. I think it's very relevant and something that needs to be said.
When I was at Dalhousie University, I was a research assistant for Dr. Beach, who was a clinical psychologist. And he would involve me with some of his work with his clients. And one day he called me in for my advice, and I said something derogatory about the client, which was highly unprofessional, but it was just between the two of us. Next day I walked into his lab, and there on my desk in his lab was an article by Brayfield and Crockett. It was published in Psychological Bulletin in the 1950s. And it was a review of the literature showing that job performance leads to job satisfaction, not vice versa. And it was that article that led me into the pursuit of a degree in industrial organizational psychology. So it's funny you asked me that question, because that was the very, very beginning of my career in organizational psych.
Wow. Now that's awesome, because we started off with, how you got into the field, and to, amplify that with this is fantastic. Now, one of the areas that I've looked at, and in the update to the high performance cycle of goal setting theory, is the research around team cohesion at the group level and individual well-being. What role do you see the team cohesion, or in practice, I guess, corporate culture has, and the well-being of individuals, and how that affects their goals as well as performance?
Well, what you asked me almost has the answer in the question. Team cohesion is obviously very important. If you have individuals who are motivated primarily for enhancing self-interest, by definition, there goes the team. If you have a corporate culture that primarily rewards individual performance, you have little likelihood of having a team. If you look at academia, for example, we're rewarded and promoted, if not solely, almost solely as individuals. So look at how few teams you see in the business school, the psychology department, or any other department. And in the real world, corporations, almost everything needs to be done through teamwork. You need teams. You need collective goals. And if the individual also has goals, those goals need to be tied directly to the overall goals that the team is striving to attain. So culture is extremely important in terms of instilling desired values, and the goals that's set must be done at the team level in addition to the individual.
Agreed. And we've actually taken that research and incorporated it into our corporate training to a lot of the organizational or team goals are around performance and process. And at the individual level, what we'll do to make it personally relevant is have the learning goals, have individual learning goals, which affect their well-being, as well as a driver of performance, and it relates then up to the organizational or team goals.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Corey, we're over an hour.
We are. I see we're coming up on an hour. So I want to thank you, Gary. The last question I'd like to ask is, and I'll give you a choice. You can either give listeners some of the habits that you use to be able to be a highly successful producer within your field, or the 100th birthday celebration question. And who would you want to have at your 100th birthday celebration? What do you want them saying about you? And if you have time, feel free to answer both.
Yeah, go ahead. I'll answer both. Ask me whatever order you want.
Okay. What are some of the success habits you use to continue to perform and have the output you have throughout the years?
I'm laughing because I gave a keynote speech in Australia a few years back, and my wife was sitting in the very front row. And my talk was on goal setting theory and the research that supports it. And someone at the end raised their hand and said, "This is all very well and good, but do you yourself set goals?" And before I could answer, my wife jumped to her feet, turned to the audience of more than 1,000 people, and shouted, "He doesn't even get out of bed on Saturday morning before he has a list of his goals." And it's true. So I think one of the things that really has helped me is that I always have a list of 3 to 5 things, no more, 3 to 5 things that I'm going to accomplish in the day, each day that I get up. Now, I confess, I don't do it every Saturday and Sunday, regardless of what my wife says, but I do it every weekday, and I have them today as to what I want to get accomplished before I go home. So I believe in lists of 3 to 5 goals to give you focus and make sure you don't meander and waste a day.
I love it. And I love the congruency between what you do with what you say and research. So the final question is your 100th birthday celebration. Who do you want there and what do you want them to say about you?
Well, professionally or personally? Personally, of course, I would love my children and my grandchildren. Professionally, I guess they'll probably I won't make it to 100, and neither would they. But of course, I would love to have people like Ed Locke and Al Bandura and Ed Lawler, Marvin Dennett, Paul Thayer, John Campbell, people whose work I've always highly respected and still refer to in a lot of my writings. And what I'd like them to say is that my work had an impact and that I was an especially good grampy to my grandkids, and that I was especially helpful and had a lasting influence on my doctoral students. So that's who I would like to have at my 100th birthday, would be my doctoral students. I have remained very close to most of them over the years, and I hope that I've had a positive influence on them, and they seem to think I've had a positive influence on them, and that's a very nice way to leave this world.
I love it, and it's a perfect way to end our podcast together, and I look forward to doing collaborative work together and furthering the great work that you've done. As I've said earlier, I highly respect and highly admire you professionally, but as I get to know you more and more on a personal level, Gary, I respect you as a man, father, grandfather, and just a person.
Thank you, Corey.